Hey all, it's freezing cold in Ireland, but have I got a hot one for you today? So it's a two-hander. We're going to, in the first part, go through the events of 2019 and the simulations of potential future pandemics. And then we'll recap on what actually happened after that simulation. And then in the second half, we're going to go through a simulation that occurred just in October 2022. And it predicts the big one, a massive pandemic in 2025. So I'll run through the details of that. And if history repeats itself, and pattern recognition is a very important part of complex problem solving. So we need to look and understand patterns and watch for when they happen again. Well, I'll go through what's apparently coming down the track to us in 2025. So you don't want to miss this one. Here we go. Now, the first thing, you can't even broach this whole topic without discussing a certain Monsieur Gitz, Mr. Pharma, Mr. Vaccine, Mr. Pandemic. So let's just get into the mood here and look at some of the kind of stuff he's been saying.
The next pandemic. Why are you saying there's going to be a next pandemic, Bill? Why are you putting that juju on us?
Certainly there will be more pandemics.
We'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say will get attention this time.
Alrighty then. So that's very interesting. There's going to be more, there's going to be bigger ones. We're going to take notice next time. Well, let's flick back now to October 2019, right? Just before COVID-19 kind of broke. This exercise event 201 you may have heard of was a huge event that occurred in October 2019, and they went through a simulation, and we're going to look now just at a summary. It sounds like sensational tabloid headline stuff, conspiracy theories, but they did indeed simulate a worldwide coronavirus pandemic in October 19, complete with media from all over the world and senior figures in business, and it was a big deal, very expensive. And they discussed at length travel restrictions, business shutdowns, and internet censorship. So there's a huge amount of focus at Event 201 about misinformation and disinformation, these new words that are everywhere nowadays. But they were talking about them all in October 2019 and calling out that if we have a big coronavirus pandemic, like sometime in the next 20, 30 years, or maybe next month, we'll have to censor because there'll be disinformation. So they were very knowing in advance. So let's have a quick look at the World Economic Forum short video. I've taken some clips from it around this auspicious event. So they said it, not me. Massive simulation, and it truly was massive. Extraordinary organisation pulled together out of a hat and run with exquisite precision. But remember, October 2019, just before the coronavirus broke. So there you have it. They had news media, senior people from all over the place, and they did the simulation big style. And of course, the public were invited to join, but actually we only found out after COVID broke that this whole thing went on. So I'm not sure which public were involved. I'd say just a few insiders, to be honest. Now have a listen to this guy from, again, the promotional video about the event from World Economic Forum.
But it's when they walked out, I think it's when we really knew that if we are going to get ready, we need to have operationalized and integrated public-private cooperation that we haven't seen before.
Public-private cooperation. When you hear that, think corporatocracy, right? Think stakeholder capitalism. Think all those words, but ultimately think of the collusion between corporate and state, which is essentially Mussolini's definition of fascism. So the corporate and the state joining together is pretty much the definition of that. So let's finish off with one last clip from the video. Enjoy and see what transpired just a month or two later. Yep, the old Wellcome Trust and WHO and hundreds of companies all joining together because they want to help. So, when you were going through the insanity of the last couple of years, wondering where the hell is all this stuff coming from that doesn't make sense, well, yeah, one major source of that stuff. So now that we've recapped on Event 201, and pattern recognition is very important in problem solving, so we've seen the pattern. Sudden event explodes, massive funding, makes up or imagines a coronavirus epidemic, and agrees we all need to censor and we need to lock down and we need to close schools and we need to do all this kind of stuff. And then within a couple of months, for the first time since the Spanish flu, a major epidemic does come up, and it is the coronavirus, and all the responses that were worked through with all of these stakeholders and senior media people and senior government people, etc., all miraculously go into place, and the traditional pandemic guidelines in all the countries are thrown in the trash, and we adopt all of these measures which were so epitomized by China, none other than China, in the early stages of coronavirus. So we throw the rule book in the bin and we start doing all this stuff. So that's Event 201 and the COVID thing. Now we're going to go on to the really interesting one, because you can see from this short illustration here that the organization happens in advance, it would appear, and then the thing happens, and then everything that was organized clicks into place. So we've seen that pattern here in a most extraordinary way. So let's look at now what's being simulated or planned for. And if history repeats itself, which it always does, we'll get to see what might be coming down the road to us. We get a preview. So here you are.
Officials in 2 Latin American countries alerted the WHO of several outbreaks of a new infectious disease that's mysteriously appearing across the region. Severe Epidemic Enterovirus Respiratory Syndrome 2025. Over the past 6 weeks alone, there have been 500 confirmed or suspected cases reported. The virus could cause a severe pandemic.
Could cause a severe pandemic, you don't say. Well, here we go again, eh? So this simulation, Catastrophic Contagion, was actually arranged and organized in October 2022, and it predicts a severe pandemic in 2025. And this time they pulled a whole load of leaders from African states and that whole region of the world and various other characters. And yeah, they did a rerun essentially of Event 201. And why would we get another pandemic? So as you can see in the screen now, around 100 years ago there was a big pandemic. There's lots of debates over exactly what constituted that, but it hit people in their 30s on average, and it caused a lot of life years lost. And you can see on the screen the death spike in Sweden for the Spanish flu, and you can see on the right the peak month of the Swedish first epidemic in April 2020. So obviously there's no comparison, and in fact in Sweden in April 2020, in their worst month for COVID, when they had no lockdowns, no masks, and kids up to 16 in school by order of the government, you couldn't even take your kid out if you wanted to, you can see there the death impact, and it compares pretty much with prior flu epidemics of the previous 20 years, and it's nothing compared to Spanish flu. So 100 years we get COVID, and you can see here clear as day in a country with no lockdown and no major measures, that was the impact. So we still haven't got a pandemic in 100 years, anything within a million miles of the Spanish flu. But in 2025 we're simulating another one. Okay, go figure. So here it is. The simulation is actually Catastrophic Contagion, it's called. And Igor's newsletter is fantastic. I suggest you sign up. But he did an article on it just the other day. So he goes through Event 201, but we've covered that already. And then he shows this, and I don't blame him for saying I'm not kidding. It's insane, but yeah, this went ahead on October 23rd, and the usual suspects turned up, and they went through excitedly the pandemic that might be coming up in 2025. So you can see it's in partnership with WHO and, yeah, usual characters. And they're predicting a pandemic with a higher fatality rate than COVID-19. So the next one they're simulating, which, if we go by the last one, might actually happen. It's up to you to decide the probability of that. And disproportionately affecting children and young people. Well, of course, COVID-19 had an average age of death in the 80s with multiple comorbidities. So although everyone went crazy about it, let's be honest, it didn't really move major needles. But this next one that's being simulated will affect children and young people. Whew. So after what we did with COVID, can you imagine how insane the world's going to go if this thing, predicted and simulated, comes to pass? But the lessons learned in this particular simulation, even more stress a stronger stance against misinformation than during the COVID pandemic, right? So more censorship. The next catastrophic contagion pandemic, a much stronger misinformation control will be undertaken. Yeah, I well believe it. And there will be a need to increase trust in government and public health, well, after COVID, increase the resiliency of populations to misleading information and reduce the spread of harmful misinformation. This sound familiar? We should continue to expect even more major disruptions from misinformation and blah, blah, blah. Yep, very familiar. Countries need to collaborate to anticipate the threat and combat it with their own laws and procedures. Not just ad hoc, but put them in now. Put in censorship laws now. And we're seeing a lot of that all around the world. Internet safety laws and censorship infrastructure. Concertedly exploring ways to address this phenomenon on a national level in advance of the next pandemic will be crucial to, of course, saving lives. Always totalitarian systems do it for our safety at the start, until you're boiled frog and it's too late to do anything. You're pretty much locked up and under the bed and you can't say anything and free speech is gone. So this is it. Winning the battle may involve taking over entire social networks. Yeah, we've seen the early stages of that in the past couple of years. Well, the simulation is planning for much more extensive control of free speech. And here's a pic someone took, I guess, on the phone of himself on the podium at this simulation. But there's no record of what was said by the gentleman in question. And just a reminder here, a timely reminder, that monkeypox was also predicted down to the month. Now that one kind of failed because it was farcical, too farcical to be swallowed by the population. But it was still predicted bang on to the month. And we saw all the media coverage for a month or two. And yes, everyone was pretty much laughing at it. And it failed. But it was a pretty strong attempt to create a nonsense pandemic out of nothing. But the real question is, this simulated one that's much more serious, because it got a simulation, right, like COVID, what might happen with that one in a couple of years coming down the track? So be watching out for it. And the article just finishes off there with the amazing timing of the BioNTech investments, etc. But these are all coincidences, I'm sure. I mean, these things are just completely coincidentally happening just before real world the events roll out. It's just a coincidence, right? Anything else would be a conspiracy theory. So you've got the heads up now. You can Google this particular simulation. It's open, like Event 201 was. It's available. It's out there. Many conspiracies are not actually particularly hidden. It's just that legacy media don't really cover them, so they might as well be hidden. But they have the advantage of technically not being hidden. You know, they are apparently open and transparent. And that's a little stroke of genius too. I'm sure you'll agree. So there you have it. Catastrophic Contagion, coming to a planet near you. So there you have it, folks. Will history repeat again? We shall see. But make sure you keep an eye on things. Make sure that everyone you can share with is aware of what's currently being planned, simulated. And we need to keep an eye on these things. So as always, trying to bring you the latest to what's going on, to be aware of geopolitics and shenanigans and corporate skullduggery, what's going on in the world that won't get covered, sadly, in the legacy media. And in the days of censorship, I have to be careful of what I say. But as you've just seen, censorship may get much, much worse, or at least certain people would like it to get much worse. So really appreciate your support, my existing Patreons and people who give donations on PayPal. The links are all down below to help me continue to do this investigative work, keep getting the message out there. We're all in this together, genuinely. So thank you.